The day after our wedding, I was still wearing yesterday's confetti in my hair when my wife's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She was in the shower, humming our first dance song. I wasn't snooping. Her screen lit up, and the preview flashed like a siren. "Hello, honey. I'm waiting for you at our cafe." It was from Marco, my business partner, the guy who gave the best man toast and hugged me like a brother. The message sat there like a nail in my shoe. I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe a typo. Maybe a joke. Anything but the obvious. Steam rolled under the bathroom door. I picked up the phone, stared at the text, and felt the floorboards tilt. We had closed on the cafe 3 years ago, back when 30 seats and a reliable espresso machine felt like a passport out of cubicles. Marco and I split everything 50-50. He handled suppliers. I ran payroll and books. My wife, handled the social media and did weekend pastries. Family business, we called it. People love that. The shower turned off. I set the phone down exactly where it had been and pasted a smile on my face. She came out in a towel, kissed my cheek, and asked if I wanted pancakes. I said sure. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone further away. While she cooked, I checked our shared calendar. She had a vendor run blocked off. The cafe opened in an hour. We were newlyweds. The message was a lit match. Pretending nothing was burning felt like a performance I hadn't rehearsed for. I told her I'd swing by the cafe to fix a grinder burr. She said, "Perfect. I'll meet you there after I see the flower wholesaler." She didn't blink. She didn't need to. That was what rattled me most. I drove without music. Every red light looked staged. The air felt thin. At a stop sign, my phone buzzed again. This time from Marco. "We need to finalize the new operating agreement. Today is good?" New agreement? We'd signed one 2 months ago. My pulse sprinted. I texted back, "At the cafe in 20. When I arrived, the barista on shift told me Marco had already been by early, checking the office safe. Why would he do that? The cash drops were my job. I opened the office, tried the safe. The envelope with last night's deposit was gone. That was the first moment I let myself think the unthinkable. Marco and I had been through everything together. Leases signed on napkins, 3 a.m., supply runs, late nights fixing espresso machines with duct tape and prayer. He was the guy I'd trusted with half my dream. And now I couldn't stop replaying the text. "Hello, honey. I'm waiting for you at our cafe." The words clung to my brain like smoke. When he walked into the office that morning, he wore the same grin he'd flashed at my wedding. Big, toothy, too confident. He clapped me on the back, called me brother, and set a folder on my desk like it was a gift. "New operating agreement," he said. "Just needs your signature. Makes everything smoother now that you're starting a family." I opened it. My name was printed neat and sharp at the bottom, with a blank line waiting. Buried in the clauses was something that made my stomach twist. If a partner was deemed medically compromised, managerial control shifted to the other. It wasn't just there by accident. It had been designed for me. I asked him where last night's deposit was. He said he'd handled it. He'd never once done that in 3 years. His excuse rolled off his tongue too easily, like he'd rehearsed it. Then, just when my pulse started to steady, my wife's name popped up on his phone screen. I saw it as he pulled it out, didn't catch the whole message, just the preview. "I'll be there soon." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and gave me that smile again, the one that never reached his eyes. "You'll thank me later, brother." I kept my voice even. "I'll run this by my lawyer before signing." That was the first time I saw the mask slip. His grin faltered, just for half a second, but it told me everything. By the time he left, I already had Val, the private investigator, on the phone. I gave her everything I knew. The text, the missing deposit, the shady clause. "They're trying to box me in," I told her. She didn't hesitate. "Then we'll build you a way out." The PI's name was Val. She met me in a diner with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like decisions. She listened without judgment, then slid me a simple agreement. Flat fee, plus expenses. If they're sloppy, we'll know by Friday. If they're careful, give me a week. Careful. They were careful. That message, "Hello, honey," was either arrogance or bait. Either way, it forced me into parallel play. Smile at home, not at work, build a shadow file in secret. I copied the cafe's security footage, snapped photos of every ledger page, exported the POS data to a thumb drive. If I was wrong, I'd apologize. If I was right, I need proof like rebar. Val started with phones and patterns. My wife's vendor runs that never matched receipts. Marco's meetings with a psychiatrist who had a history of writing competency evaluations for civil cases. She found Shell LLCs registered to Marco's cousin. Companies with names that sounded like cleaning products, one of them holding a quiet lien against our house. I hadn't authorized any lien. How? I asked. Power of attorney, Val said, sliding over a copy. My signature floated on the page like a forged blessing. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who worked nights at a clinic where my wife volunteered. I felt the floor drop another story. They weren't just stepping out. They were building a trapdoor to drop me through. Val outlined their plan like she was reading a weather report. They'll provoke a crisis. Maybe say you brandished a knife in the kitchen. They'll call the police, then a mental health crisis team. The psychiatrist files an affidavit that you're a danger to yourself or others, recommends conservatorship. Marco petitions for temporary control of the business to protect employees and customers. Your wife petitions for guardianship, for your safety. With POA and temporary orders, they move assets. Once the dust settles, you're out. I stared at the coffee ring on the table. How do we stop it? We don't stop it, Val said. We get there first. That night, I came home wearing Val's recorder, a piece of plastic no bigger than a stick of gum, but heavy as a loaded gun in my pocket. She'd told me, say nothing new. Let them talk. Your job is to listen. Easy to say, harder to do when every nerve in me screamed to confront. My wife came in late, humming like she always did when she wanted to cover her tracks. Her hair was perfect, her blouse crisp. Nobody looks that put together after a flower run. She smelled faintly of vanilla syrup, yes, but also of a cologne I knew wasn't mine. I forced myself to notice, not accuse. That was the game now. I asked casual questions. How was the vendor? Did you get a deal? She stumbled, not enough to confess, just enough to trip over her own story. The recorder caught every pause, every nervous laugh. At dinner, she reached across the table, her eyes soft with that concerned spouse look. You've been so tense. Maybe you should talk to someone. Like who? I asked. She hesitated. Marco knows a doctor. He's helped people who get overwhelmed. The way she said overwhelmed made me want to flip the table. Instead, I leaned back, steady. Specializes in competency evaluations, right? Her face flickered like a storm had knocked the lights out for a second. What are you talking about? You tell me. The silence after that was thick, her fork clinking against the plate the only sound. Then she plastered on a smile and changed the subject. I played along, every word another stitch in the noose she was tying for herself. When she finally went to bed, I sat in the dark kitchen, staring at the glowing red light of the recorder. The hardest part was pretending to be clueless, pretending to still be the man who believed our vows meant something. By morning, Val had already subpoenaed the notary's logbook. Turns out my supposed signature on that power of attorney was dated the exact day I'd been 200 miles away at a coffee expo, badge scans, and hotel receipts to prove it. The notary herself worked nights at a clinic where my wife volunteered. Coincidence? No. Collusion. The psychiatrist's records were worse. An unsigned affidavit already drafted in my name, describing me as paranoid, prone to erratic behavior, potential danger to himself and others. The kicker? It was created a week before my wedding. I stared at the document, my pulse hammering in my ears. They hadn't just betrayed me after the vows. They'd gone into the ceremony with the knife already sharpened. Val's voice on the phone was steady, surgical. They needed the marriage for spousal rights. That's why they rushed the wedding. That's why the affidavit sat waiting. I felt like I was standing in the middle of my own house while termites ate the foundation. Everything looked solid on the surface, but underneath? Hollow, ready to collapse. And I knew then, I wasn't just gathering evidence to protect myself. I was preparing for war. On Wednesday, I picked up a decoy habit, running before dawn. Really, I was measuring routes from the cafe to the bank, from the bank to the county records office, from records to a quiet law firm Val had recommended, the kind with soft carpets and hard jaws. The partner, a woman named Ellis, read our file twice, then once more slowly. What do you want? She asked. To keep my life, I said, and to make the traps snap on their own ankles. Ellis built a counterclaim like a machine. Fraud, forgery, civil conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty, intentional infliction of emotional distress. and a request for a temporary restraining order to freeze any transfers. She threaded in the lien, the fake POA, the pre-written affidavit, and the new operating agreement. If they file for guardianship, Ellis said, we file to enjoin, attach, and audit. My phone buzzed. My wife, a heart emoji followed by, dinner at the cafe at 9? Marco wants to toast us. Val texted from a second number, go. We're the recorder. Sit with your back to the camera. Let them hang themselves. At 9, the cafe was closed, lights low, just the hum of refrigerators. Marco poured wine like a priest pouring grace. My wife wore the dress from our rehearsal dinner. Nostalgia as camouflage. We toasted to new beginnings. Then Marco asked for my keys. Housekeeping, he said, grinning. I'll get copies made for emergency access. Why would you need emergency access to my home? I asked. For your safety, my wife said, too quickly. For the business, Marco added, even quicker. The recorder caught my measured breath. I'm fine, I said. And the business is fine. That's not what the doctor thinks, my wife murmured. There it was, the rope paid out. By Friday morning, Val's timeline was complete, and Ellis had our counterclaim polished like a blade. Every thread we'd been pulling, ghost vendors, forged POA, siphoned payroll, the psychiatrist's draft affidavit, now tied into a net we could throw over Marco and my wife. But even with all that evidence, my hand still shook when the doorbell rang. A process server stood there, polite as a mailman, but the packet he handed me was poison. Petition for emergency temporary guardianship. Application for psychiatric evaluation. Hearing scheduled for Monday at 9 a.m. I flipped through the pages. Marco had signed a declaration claiming I'd recently displayed erratic and paranoid behavior, citing fabricated incidents, me supposedly shouting at staff, mishandling cash, forgetting orders. My wife had filed her own affidavit, softer in tone but deadlier in intent. She wrote she was deeply concerned for my well-being, afraid I might harm myself under stress. Lies, all of it, but dressed up to sound like care. I texted Val one word, now? The next 48 hours blurred into a war room. Ellis camped at her office with boxes of our exhibits. Val running between the courthouse, banks, and notary's office like a courier in battle. I barely slept. 2 hours here, 1 hour there, waking to sign affidavits and ferry evidence across town in my old leather backpack. That bag used to carry coffee beans and filters. Now it carried the only proof I had that I wasn't insane. Saturday night, Ellis gave me the speech I'd been dreading. They will paint you as unstable. They will provoke you in court, try to make you snap. You don't react. You sit. You breathe. You let the documents speak. Understand? I nodded, though inside I wanted to tear the whole world apart. At dawn Monday, we were already in the courthouse parking lot. Ellis filed our counterclaim at 8:02 a.m., 15 minutes before their petition was due to be heard. Fraud, forgery, civil conspiracy, breach of fiduciary duty. A request for sanctions. A motion for temporary restraining order to freeze all cafe and shell company accounts. It was a legal ambush, and Marco never saw it coming. When they walked in, holding hands like a couple in a soap opera, they looked calm, smug, like people arriving to collect their prize. My wife even wore pearls. Marco carried a leather briefcase like a prop. I carried that same backpack. Inside, the forged POA with the notary's log disproving it. The psychiatrist's affidavit dated a week before the wedding. Screenshots of texts, audio recordings of their concern, bank statements showing siphoned money, shell companies tied to Marco's cousin. A flood waiting for the right crack. And the judge would be the one to open the gates. Courtrooms have their own kind of weather. The air is always colder than outside, but the weight of silence presses on your chest until you can barely breathe. Monday morning, that silence felt like it was waiting for me. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and glasses that dangled from a chain. She looked over the docket as though she'd seen every brand of family betrayal and corporate fraud the world could conjure, and ours was just the next flavor. Marco's attorney, slick hair, slicker voice, stood first. He spun his tale with practiced outrage. I was erratic, paranoid, unfit to manage my own affairs. He pointed to Marco and my wife like they were saints reluctantly forced into this courtroom to protect me from myself. She fears for his well-being, the attorney intoned, gesturing toward my wife. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, perfectly timed, like she'd rehearsed the scene in front of a mirror. Marco squeezed her hand, the picture of loyal concern. I wanted to stand, to shout, to tell the judge everything in one breath, but Ellis pressed a hand to my arm. Not yet. When the attorney sat, Ellis rose. She didn't bluster. She didn't pace. She walked to the podium like she was about to read the weather report, calm and inevitable. Your Honor, she began. The petitioners would like this court to believe my client is unstable, incapable of managing his business or his life. What they fail to mention is that their entire case rests on fraud we can prove. She slid Exhibit A onto the bench. The forged power of attorney. Exhibit B. The notary log, showing I'd been 200 miles away the day I supposedly signed it. Exhibit C. The psychiatrist's pre-drafted affidavit, created a week before my wedding, describing me as paranoid and dangerous, before my wife even put on the white dress. The judge's eyebrows climbed. She looked at Marco's lawyer. Counselor, how do you explain this? He stammered, shuffled papers, muttered about clerical errors. Ellis didn't wait. She moved on, voice sharp now. We also submit evidence of financial malfeasance. Payroll siphons routed into a card belonging to Mr. DeLuca's cousin. Ghost vendors billing the cafe for supplies never delivered. A lien placed on my client's home using forged documents. All timed to coincide with their plan to remove him under the guise of guardianship. And then, the final blow. Ellis pressed play on the recorder. The audio from that night at the cafe, my wife's voice soft but clear. That's not what the doctor thinks. The judge leaned back in her chair, exhaled slowly, and finally turned to my wife. Ma'am, are you in the habit of consulting psychiatrists about your husband's mental health without his knowledge? She froze. For once, the rehearsed tears didn't come. Marco tried to recover, his voice too loud. This is a circus. He's delusional. Enough, the judge snapped. Her gavel cracked against the wood like a thunderclap. The room went still. I am denying your petition for guardianship, she declared. Furthermore, I am granting the respondent's request for a temporary restraining order. All accounts linked to the cafe, the shell corporations, and any associated liens are hereby frozen pending forensic audit. Additionally, I am referring the forged documents to the district attorney for investigation. It was over in less than 20 minutes. Marco's face collapsed into something ugly, the smirk gone, his jaw twitching like he wanted to scream. My wife slumped back in her chair, pale, staring at the table instead of me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I sat very still, my hands folded in front of me, while inside my chest, my heartbeat finally slowed for the first time in weeks. The trap they built had just snapped shut on them. The courthouse doors banged shut behind me, and for the first time in weeks, the sky looked like it belonged to me again. The August heat pressed down, thick and humid, but it still felt cleaner than the air I'd been breathing inside that courtroom. Ellis slipped her sunglasses on, calm as if she'd just handled a parking ticket instead of dismantling an attempted guardianship scam. Val, standing a little behind her, lit a cigarette. She didn't smoke, just holding it between her fingers like a trophy. Told you they'd hang themselves, she said. I wanted to laugh, to cheer, to gloat, but instead I felt hollow. Like I just walked out of a fire, skin intact, but smelling of smoke. My wife and Marco were still inside, talking in hushed, frantic tones with their lawyer. I caught a glimpse of them through the glass, her face pale and drawn, his twisted in a sneer that finally showed the cracks. Ellis touched my arm. Don't celebrate yet. They'll pivot. People like this always pivot. She was right. That's why, instead of going home, we drove straight to a windowless office 2 blocks away. A rented conference room with walls the color of oatmeal and a single rattling air vent. Waiting there was a forensic accountant, a wiry man named Benton who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s. His desk was already covered in charts, bank printouts, and a map of transfers that spiderwebbed like veins. Follow the money, he said by way of greeting. It always tells the truth. He pointed out the siphons Val had flagged. Phantom vendors, payroll ghosts, inventory shortages that lined up with Marco's cousin's card. Each withdrawal had a twin deposit, smaller but steady, feeding a trust under my wife's maiden name. One thread led to the lien on my house. Another ended in a brokerage account holding just under $200,000. If the judge hadn't frozen this, Benton muttered, It would all be gone by now. My stomach turned. All the late nights, the double shifts, the years of grinding. It had been nothing but fuel for their getaway car. That night, back at the house, my wife started packing. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just moved through the bedroom with cold efficiency, folding clothes into a suitcase like she was on autopilot. "I need space," she said, voice flat. "You've made this ugly." "I made it visible," I said. She stopped, hands trembling over a stack of blouses, then shook her head and zipped the case shut. "We could still fix it." Fixing it would have been not doing it. She left without another word. The slam of the door echoed like a verdict. Later that night, Marco's name lit up my phone. 2 texts. First, a string of curses. Second, "You'll regret this." I stared at the words until the screen went dark. Then I forwarded both to Ellis. She called immediately, her voice clipped. "Do not respond. Ever. Let them put their threats on paper or voicemail. We'll use every one of them." 2 days later, Benton sent me a new report. He'd found another pending lien. This one queued to hit Monday morning, transferring partial rights to my house into a trust tied directly to my wife. The judge's freeze had stopped at mid-flight, like a bullet caught in glass. But if we hadn't acted when we did, I'd have woken up one morning to discover my own home wasn't mine anymore. That broke something in me. I sat on the floor of the empty bedroom, leaning against the wall where her dresser used to stand, and let the silence fill me. The house was still legally mine, but it didn't feel like home. It felt like a crime scene where the chalk outlines hadn't been drawn yet. When I finally dragged myself to bed, I realized I was still wearing the recorder. I hadn't turned it off since Friday. The red light blinked at me in the dark, a reminder the war wasn't over. It had just changed fronts. The DA moved faster than I thought government ever could. Within days, the forged POA was in their hands, and the notary cracked under questioning. She admitted she'd stamped it as a favor to my wife, her voice shaky, her lawyer doing all the talking. The psychiatrist, meanwhile, lawyered up. That told me all I needed to know. Marco's cousin, the one who'd been laundering the siphoned payroll through his shell LLCs, vanished for a week, then reappeared in court with a deal memo. He wanted immunity in exchange for cooperation. Benton, the forensic accountant, nearly smiled when he saw it. "That'll blow the whole tree wide open," he said, tapping the chart of money transfers like it was a treasure map. My wife tried a different strategy. She hired new counsel and suddenly became the manipulated spouse, the poor woman swept along by Marco's schemes. But Val's surveillance, the texts, the late-night audio recordings, they all showed her leading, not following. Ellis laid it out cold. She wasn't a victim. She was a co-conspirator. Depositions were brutal. Marco tried to sneer his way through, but under Ellis's cross he stuttered, contradicted himself, and finally shouted, "This is all lies," which only made the stenographer's fingers fly faster. My wife kept her eyes on the table, answering in clipped syllables, like each word was being pulled out with pliers. The forensic audit filled in the blanks. Cafe funds had bought hotel suites, expensive dinners, business trips that coincided with weekends my wife was supposedly at vendor conferences. Watching the receipts pile up was like watching my own trust burn, line by line. Settlement offers came in quiet waves, always dressed up as compromise. We sent everyone back. Ellis was relentless. "They don't want peace," she told me. "They want escape, and we're not giving them the exit." By the time the judge set a trial date, Marco had churned through 2 more attorneys. My wife had stopped meeting my eyes in the hallway. The last time she spoke directly to me, her voice cracked. "You were supposed to trust me." "I did," I said. "That's what you spent." She flinched, but she didn't answer. On the morning of trial, I tied my tie with hands that finally felt steady. Ellis's opening was a scalpel, Marco's was a shovel. By mid-afternoon, the judge had heard enough. She entered judgment on our counterclaims. Injunction made permanent. Damages to be calculated after the audit. Referral to criminal court for forgery and fraud. She voided the forged POA, voided the lien, and removed Marco from any role at the cafe pending dissolution. She didn't look at my wife when she said, "The court is troubled by your conduct." After, I walked to the cafe alone. The grinders hummed. The open sign glowed. Regulars lifted their cups. I stepped behind the bar, pulled a shot, and tasted something like oxygen. The place felt smaller without the lie living in it. Val slid onto a stool. You did it, she said. We did it, I corrected. Maybe, she said. But you're the one who read the message and chose the truth over the lullaby. I locked the door early that night and sat at a corner table, pen hovering over a blank notebook. The day after my wedding, I thought the message on her phone would end me. Instead, it ended the performance. The marriage, the partnership, the version of me that trusted darkness to behave. I won't pretend I'm fine, but I'm free. And tomorrow, I'll put out the croissants before dawn and tell the regulars the espresso tastes a little stronger lately. Maybe it does. Maybe I do.